Hi there. I'm Eric Wordweaver Sjerven, Goathe of the Ridgar folk here in East Texas, and I'd like to welcome you to the Raven's Call. This is a show where I ramble on about different heathen-related subjects, just kind of whatever strikes my fancy, sets my mind on fire at the time. Big UPG warning at the beginning of this episode, like always. This is just the opinion of one heathen in East Texas. I am by no means the end-all be-all authority of anything. I just happen to like to talk a lot and have decades worth of experience living my heathen life and leading a tribe here in the East Texas area. So hopefully these videos can be conversation starters and can give you some ideas on how to build your own community, your own tribe. If anything, just get you thinking outside the box a little bit and maybe re-examining some things from a heathen worldview that maybe you hadn't thought of before, or maybe you disagree with me so much that you're arguing with the screen and fermenting your own viewpoints in opposition. And that's also, wisdom is wisdom regardless of the source. I've got a book review coming up that I got some wisdom from this book, but I hate the book. It's a thing. I'm not going to give anything away as to why or how or whatnot, but yeah, it was one of those that there's a lot of disagreement, and yet there was still some wisdom that I gained from it. So we'll see when that time comes exactly how it goes. I'm not done with the book yet. I got to finish it. But so I'm going to hold off on my actual, I'm not liking it where I'm at, but that doesn't mean that it's not going to do something in the end. We'll see. I don't know. It is a fiction, but weird. Anyway, I'll explain in the review. I'll put it in as an episode coming up when I get the chance. So, all of the housekeeping stuff down below, you guys know. Click the link for the book down below if you want my book. That is the Saga of Bjorn Thorolfson. I am in the process of building the skeleton for the sequel, or another, not necessarily a sequel, another book in that vein. We'll see. I don't know. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to lock myself into something that I regret later. But I do have some ideas. So we're going to see where this goes. I'm at the park preparing for a park move. So if you see a weird cut and time shift, it's because I had people show up and needed to kill this in order to greet people. So it is what it is. So anyway, I also may be trying to shorten my times just a little bit when I do these videos, solely because uploading has become an issue. I don't work in a location with high-speed internet anymore, and my internet at the house is redonkulously slow. So I have issues with the uploading. I'm having to mega compress my videos, which I know is not great for quality. Video quality doesn't matter because it's a talking head. Most of you don't even look at the video anyway. You're paying attention to the audio. And the audio has been dodgy lately because I have been filming at the house mostly, which, as far away from the road as I am, you would think it wouldn't pick up road noise nearly as bad as it does. But the audio equipment picks up road noise so loud. I don't even notice it while I'm videoing. And then I'll go back and listen to the audio afterwards and I'm like, why is that so loud? It's the acoustics of the valley that, I live on a hill and the roadside's on another high ground. So it's just weird. You would think the trees would dissipate it all, but apparently not enough. It is what it is. So, be looking for that coming up. I've got new stuff coming out. So anyway, like I said, I'll do book stuff later, and I'll keep you guys updated. But I do not want to lock myself into anything specific, as I bump the microphone, on my book just yet, because I'm not 100% certain on my approach. I'm about 99% certain on my approach. Got to duck out of frame real quick. Drop my hat. Okay. So, that being said, let's go ahead and jump into today's subject. Now, if I can stop moving the microphone. Today's subject is a viewer request from actually I'm not entirely certain how to interpret his name on his email. So I'm going to call him Mr. Hootie. Hopefully he will understand what I mean by that. But I'm not going to use the full name for anonymity's sake. But nonetheless, this individual wrote in with a very particular question, and this was back in July, which I am so far behind on catching up on emails. You guys know, you've seen the saga of what's going on. I'm doing good to get like 2 videos out a month at this point, which is horrible for my numbers, but again, I don't really do it for the numbers. I'm trying, but I've got to work with what I've got to work with, and you guys know I'm going through the whole job thing, so it is what it is. Now, in dealing with Mr. Hootie's question, his question was specifically about Frith and divorce, particularly where kids are involved. And I'm not going to go into the full detail of his particular scenario, but he did indicate that in his scenario that he was a divorcee, and he is now with a new partner, and his fiance is very understanding, also heathen, and kind of gets everything as far as the heathen worldview, where he's coming from, all this stuff. Good match. Well done, sir. Happy for you. But he has kids with the ex. And the ex, with the kids, has child support, all the fun stuff. And so his question was, what is the heathen stance with regards to things like divorce, and particularly upholding Frith with someone that you have genuinely broken Frith with? And how does that play out? And what's the whole status on that? And this is one where I'm going to come at it from a couple of different angles, okay? Because essentially what he's indicating is that he's still taking care of his kids, and he's having to uphold this obligation with this woman that he cannot stand, and for very good reasons, I'm sure. They're divorced for a reason. So how does he come about it? How does he rationalize it within a heathen context, a heathen worldview? Okay, not a problem. There's a couple of different ways to approach this. One is the historical way, which was that divorce was not uncommon in the olden days. And a lot of times in the olden days, like arch-heathen times, when you're dealing with divorce, again, it was an obligation. There were financial things that were involved. You can do a lot of research in that respect and figure out where the legalities were. It's going to be very regionally based. It's going to be very very specific to region, to tribe, to country, as it's frequently a legality thing. And so you're going to have to, depends on where you're looking at and what details you're looking for as far as which set you go with and why. And like if you're going more Icelandic, you would look at the old Icelandic laws. If you're looking at more of the Anglo-Saxon stuff, well, then you're going to want to look at some of the more you're going to want to look at more of the mainland Europe kind of stuff, and England area. Just depends on time frame. It depends on region. It depends on culture, and so it's not easy to pinpoint how it would be handled in the olden days. It entirely depends on whether you want to do a hardcore reconstructionist approach or if you want to do something more modern. And so that's the approach that I'm going to take on this. Is I'm going to look at this from a modern heathenry standpoint, because in the olden days, in arch-heathen times, which spans like a huge amount of time, there's more arch-heathen times than there are modern heathen times, just by virtue of time scale. But like in the olden days, a large percentage of areas of heathen approach, divorce was not unusual. It wasn't demonized the way that it was with the church. Once Christianity and the Judeo-Christian influences really took over up north, that shifted heavily because, Christians are not cool with divorce. It's not all right with them. And so that brings in a whole different level of guilt and obligation, etc., etc., etc. Because your obligation at that point is to the church as opposed to each other, and it's a weird thing. I don't fully understand it because not my worldview, not how I come at things. But in dealing with heathens at the time, it was not unusual to have divorces, and with that, I'm sure they had some issues with custody and things like that. But I'm certain a lot of it was probably tied to lines of succession, because a lot of things there were patriarchal as far as, or genetic at least. I'm going to move the microphone real quick. Were genetic as far as, lines of succession and things like that. So it behooved a father to keep a son in the line, or, things like that as far as after a divorce, if there were benefits. But usually once they're adults, they're kind of on their own kind of deal. And there's not a lot that I have seen in the reading that I have done. Now, some of you may have come across some other stuff that does have some more detail in it, but it wasn't a main focus. That's not something that I saw written down a lot, and I have not gone back into the law books to see what laws were established there. So that may be something I look into later on. I just don't know if I'm really willing to commit that level of research to this particular topic when there's others that I need to spend more time researching. So that's kind of it for the arch-heathen thing. There are different elements to consider based on region, and that's going to be things like line of succession, the much more open and accepting view on divorce, because marriage was more of an arrangement. It was more of a business arrangement between families than it was anything else. Of course, the love match and everything, but even then, women enjoyed a lot more rights within heathen society than compared to outside society. It still doesn't compare to modern day and the rights that they enjoy today, as we've finally gotten over some of the old stupidity. But they did have more rights, and therefore things like divorce and the ability to remarry and things like that were much more even in approach, which was nice. Not 100%, and very, very heavily dependent on region and time frame and all that. So, modern day. Talking about modern day when you're dealing with divorce is, I mean, it's a dodgy thing, and I've talked about divorce here on the channel before. But that was more specifically about the divorce itself and the approach of things, but not necessarily about this lingering Frith obligation and dealing with children. And it's actually a fairly simple answer, and the answer is you still have Frith to the children because they're born into Frith. There is a reciprocal obligation between parent and child that is established at birth, that is inherited in their orlog. It's probably the first debt that they incur. You know, their debt to you, and you have a debt to them. And it's not even, debt's the wrong word. It's obligation. It's a reciprocal obligation. They, in order to reciprocate, because you're obliged to keep them alive, and then they give back in their life by surviving and thriving and bringing good things to the family, building the luck of the family, helping the family survive, doing the generational thing. It's a whole deal. But they're born into Frith. I mean, Frith is the first familial reciprocal obligation. It's a key factor of what makes family family. It's a key factor of what binds the sib together. And so it's the essence of the relationship. And in that, and keep in mind, guys, when I say obligation does not have the negative connotation that an interaction with a tyrannical ruling caste and things like that might lead one to have. A lot of people have very negative emotions when it comes to the word obligation, and that's not necessarily a thing. There are obligations that we uphold all the time that we are more than happy to. Not only that, we're like overjoyed to and don't even think of it as an obligation because it's just something we want to do. You know, it's specifically when it comes to loved ones, family, things like that. You don't tend to think of those things as obligations. They are, but you don't think of them like that because of the negative connotation that kind of comes along with the term obligation. But when we're talking about it, I am going to use the term obligation because it is accurate to what's going on. Sorry, I had to clear the screen. And so, Frith is, I'm going to clear the screen again. Frith is reciprocal obligation between individuals, and that is the key element of family. When the children are born, they're born into Frith. And you bear the burden of the obligation first as the parent. When dealing with divorce, when you've got family units that have been split up, the parent still holds Frith to the children. Now, do all parents uphold this? No, absolutely not. We have a lot of broken family stories where parents don't uphold frith to children, but we've also got a number of stories where parents betray frith to the children while they're still in the home, even if they're still married, etc., etc. So it's not a universal thing. I find a vast majority of parents uphold frith to their children. It's just, that's the right thing to do, and most of them do it. Now, there are a large number of people that don't, and that's the whole reason that, I got into the childcare industry and why I ran the emergency shelter and stuff back in the day, is because I was taking care of those kids whose parents broke frith. And that's the whole foster care system, is about taking care of kids whose parents broke frith. And that's a heavy thing. So I am one that's going to heavily advocate maintaining frith to children post-divorce, because it's not their fault. They're unwilling participants. They didn't sign up for it. They didn't sign up for the divorce. They didn't sign up to be born. They just wanted to exist and live and be happy, and especially at that early primal age. So yes, of course, the idea behind child support is that you are upholding your financial burden in the care of the children. So it's obviously upholding frith in that regards. It is seeing to your reciprocal obligation to this child, your end of the bargain in keeping the child taken care of. But then that comes into a different element, which we all know, which is misuse of child care funds by the divorced parent. Like, you're paying child support, and the ex that has the kids, whichever way that split goes, receives the payment, the child support payment, and then does not do what they should with it. They spend it on themselves. They get new this, new that, etc., etc., etc. And from a certain standpoint, it could feel like, why am I doing this? Why am I giving them money just so that she can have this level of comfort and not spend the money on the kids? And I mean, there's so many situations where this is it's blown out of proportion by the individual making the payments, and in other ones, it's extremely accurate and sickening, because that money should be spent towards the kids, or at least towards the family, to help support the family, and it's very selfishly used, and that's a thing, and that is not necessarily a betrayal of frith. You don't have frith with that individual per se. You do have reciprocal obligations with that person, though, because there is an arrangement, and in this one, it's legal obligations because of the legality. Keep in mind, the way we have things set up with regards to like child support and custody and things like that are different than the way they had it back in the day, because our legal system is different. We approach things a little bit differently. And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that we have to work within the boundaries of that. A lot of the legalities of the time were built around heathen worldview and ethics. And then, especially during Viking times, you started to see a shift as the infiltration of Christianity and the conversion period led to laws that heavily outlawed old pagan practices, old heathen practices, and yet at the same also still reflected old heathen practices. So you got to really study and look at it in order to parse out what's heathen and what's not in it, because it can get a little bit sideways in the law system, especially around that time. But in today's society, it's very easy to see that, the law was not built around heathen worldview in Western society. It just wasn't. It was built around more of a Judeo-Christian approach to things. But in essence, when you get down to the obligation of frith and divorce, it's not wholly disparate. When it comes to the aspect of upholding obligation to tend to or provide for the family, this is still a thing, because the kids are individuals to whom you still hold Frith. And in order to meet your obligation of Frith, you have to maintain this business arrangement with the ex, because the olden marriage was a business arrangement. This is still a business arrangement. It's just the business arrangement around taking care of and providing for the kids. Now, there comes a point where you have to start getting lawyers and stuff involved if things are heavily misappropriated. And that's, for legal purposes, I can't advocate one thing or another. I can't go in and give specifics because no two cases are exactly the same. And no matter what I say, there's going to be someone out there with anecdotal evidence that either supports or refutes my particular take on the situation, and they will be completely valid because their situation is unique to themselves. Okay? If it seems like I'm hemming and hawing and rambling, there's a reason for it. I'm kind of dancing around specifics, which I will do with some of these more dodgy subjects, just simply because it is what it is. And the nature of the subject means that I need to be a little bit more ginger in my approach. So anything dealing with divorce definitely falls into that category, because I can't legally advocate that I'm not one that's going to advocate you not make your child support payments because, let me make this clear, the author of the email never once indicated that they didn't want to make them, just that, they were just one of my hot take on the approach. They are very adamant about taking care of their kids and upholding their obligation, and I have very much respect for that. It was more the mechanics of the interaction of Frith. And the mechanics of the interaction of Frith here are that you do still hold Frith with the children, and you have the reciprocal obligation to the children. In order to fulfill that obligation, you must maintain this business arrangement with the bio-parent that is the ex now, so the caregiver. And in order to provide for the children, maintain that Frith obligation, you have to support the caregiver. That is where there's bleed over, because the caregiver is caring for your children. And why I said before, sometimes those situations are not nearly as black and white and cut and dry as it looks like, is because sometimes the amount of money that you give for child support goes to support the caregiver in the care of those children. If they are meeting all of the obligations, as far as making sure the kids are clothed, that they've got what they need, that they're making school and food and all this other stuff, it's not necessarily inappropriate for a caregiver to have a certain level of comfort within the home that allows them to better care for the children through their own mental health and well-being. Does it get dodgy? Yes, because this is an individual with whom you've broken Frith, and with an individual that you do not still necessarily bear goodwill. In some cases. In other cases, people still have fantastic relationships with their exes, and they co-parent, and it's a non-issue. But those aren't the kind of people that would be... those are the kind of people that would not necessarily be writing in about this. The gist of everything is that, sometimes you need to support the caregiver in order to see to the well-being of the children. And that's fine. You want the caregiver to be well taken care of because the caregiver is caring for your kids. And in order to uphold that Frith obligation to the kids, the caregiver needs to be doing well too, even if it's a person that you hate. Even if they've broken Frith and you guys have just absolutely no love for each other, you're not supporting just the kids, you're supporting the household in which the kids live. You're supporting their hearth. Because remember, the hearth was the smallest indivisible social structure within heathenry. We didn't go down to individual as far as level of social identity, because you operate as a hearth. Lone wolves were kind of out of society. You represented your hearth, your immediate family. It was even present in the naming system of, Ragnarsson or Jonsson or something like that. You are named after the parental unit in perpetuation, a number of reasons, but it does show that familial bond, that basic sib unit. And so you're not just supporting the kids when you do this, you're supporting the hearth. And you're not just sharing your finances, you're sharing your luck. And you want your luck to bleed over and support the children and the hearth in which they live, because that's how they thrive. That's how they survive. And if they're to be your legacy, you want them to do well. In order for them to do well, the hearth in which they dwell needs to do well. Even if you can't stand the other person, then it falls into the realm of willing sacrifice for the betterment of your innengarth, for your kin. So that's where that kind of crossover as far as obligation and twist goes. So hopefully this helped shed some light. I'm not going to ramble on any further because I need to reply to a couple of messages regarding the park moot. But yeah, I'm going to let this one sit at a little shorter time to see if I can't upload it a little bit easier. And then we'll see where these things go in the future. Please do continue to write in. I will continue to pull things as I can and reply to them. And if anything, this should evidence the fact that just because you write in and you don't hear anything for a while doesn't mean I'm not coming back to it, okay? I will hit them when I can. It's just crazy and in between. And I may not film in the park again because there's a lot of distraction around me at the moment. And I think that the quality of the videos comes out a little bit better when I can be a little more... So, going to be playing with different things. Thank you for sticking with me through the transition. We'll see where this goes in the future. I will try and find a better way and place and time to film. So I miss having an office, you know. Being a mobile unit and working from the house, you think I would have plenty of time to film at the house, but not the case. So I don't know. I guess we'll figure it out. Anyway, thank you all for watching, listening, however you enjoy this. Hail to you. May your hearth fires burn bright. Okay, whew, we're gonna give this a shot. So yeah, updates since last video. We did get to have a D&D session, and it was amazing. It was a lot of fun. I think I'm gonna lose the hat for the video because, yeah, it was great. We started out with, I had this whole plan, but one of the characters that I wanted to introduce was kind of a Easter egg for a couple of my players that weren't gonna be able to make it. So I at the last minute kind of did a reroute. Wasn't really intended, but worked out well that my rogue hadn't gone to the Rogues Guild yet, and I had just so happened to build up a little dungeon crawl in order to get them there, you know, because it's like, hey, come on, you know, you're gonna get to the Thieves Guild, you're gonna have to go through some stuff. So I was like, okay, cool. And so he decided he was gonna go to the Thieves Guild. I was like, okay, cool. Of course, I kind of egged it on. Full disclosure, I decided at the last minute I needed to switch to a different plan for the night, so I ended up having something rather important stolen from the rogue by a bigger, badder rogue, and he couldn't handle it, so he obviously went to the Rogues Guild. So it's not like he just decided to go. I did kind of railroad him on this one, but he's been meaning to go for a while, so I arranged an opportunity for him to do so, and he had a blast doing it, because he went down into the sewers to head towards the guild, following all the signs and all the tells. And lo and behold, he steps in, and like within the first couple of seconds, he botches a perception roll, and he gets attacked and enveloped by a gelatinous cube, which I haven't used the gelatinous cube in years. I've always wanted to bust it back out, but by the time, that's such a low level entity to have to fight that in order to make it worthwhile, it's got to be a really low level session, relatively low level session. And I managed to play it. I forced them into a bottleneck, so it was like you can't get past him, and he's just like pushing in on you. And the rolls were pretty good. So all in all, it worked out really well. Pardon, I'm at the park, so crying in the background and stuff is not unusual. But yeah, so once, because the whole thing was he snuck off from the party, and I'd intended for this to be kind of a group thing. And so some of the other things that I had planned for it were, they would have killed him. So I busted out the gelatinous cube, which still could have killed him. Totally could have killed him. As a matter of fact, it almost did. One of these days I'm going to teach the rogue a lesson, but I doubt it. I doubt he's going to pick up on it. But yeah, the whole don't split the party thing. Yeah, we went there last night. Last night is probably a couple weeks ago, but still, he he got enveloped by the gelatinous cube and nearly died. And then the rest of the party caught up to him, and they all managed to make it through and make it to the Rogues Guild, which was a lot of fun. We had a good run through there. It sets the stage for some stuff coming up later on. I was flying by the seat of my pants on some of it, and the end result was that I ended up having to introduce a character early that I hadn't really planned on yet and had not fleshed out. So I'm glad that was towards the end of the session, because if I had to keep up RP with that particular character, things were going to get dodgy real fast, because I wasn't sure where I was going or how I was going to play it. And I'm out of practice on some of it, and sometimes being a month, 2 months, 3 months between sessions can be a bit daunting. So it's hard to get back into character sometimes. Some of the characters I fall right back into just because I've got them down. Some of the tertiary and supporting characters, not as much. Not as much, especially when it's just like a slight accent, because you don't waste your good accents on supporting characters. You give them to good strong characters that are part of the plot. If you've got a really unique accent, you don't use it on Joe Blow NPC. You save that sucker for the head of your Thieves Guild, your main vendor that the people are interacting with all the time. Things like that. You go through and you use the good accents on the good characters. Simple as that. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck you'll have wasted the good accent that you can do easily on a throwaway character, and then you won't be able to use it again, which is disappointing. And then you get stuck with some kind of weird, trying too hard accent on a character that you play all the time, and that can break the immersion. And not to mention, it's just a pain. And then consistency-wise, it gets to be difficult because you got to recreate that, but it's not a normal go-to. And so you never have, you can't just it's like with my main guy, he's Grigor Ashendale, and he is the proprietor of the magic shop there, the Crystal Caldera. It's the magic shop in town in Hofting, in my world of Renothia. And Grigor is like Boris Badenov type Russian accent, but he's gregarious, he's big, he's tall, so it's no problem to fall into accent, They walk into the store, it's hello, welcome to Crystal Caldera. And then I just rock with it, It's easy to get into Grigor, because Grigor is easy. Some of the others are a little more like base British, or, fall into the Irish a lot. Irish, Scottish, British, German. They did not like my German. That was not fun. I had a German that they interacted with. He was not German, and it was meant to be a caricature because he was like pumpy, big aristocrat. It was spat. Anyway, they had a lot of fun with it. It was ridiculous. But anyway, enough show and tell. We're going to go on to the episode, okay? I'll tell you guys more about D&D in later snippets. All right, we're live in 3, 2, 1. Let's jam.